Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final talk in this year's Archives Month series of talks about women and women inventors. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Larry Gragg. He is the Curator's Distinguished Teaching Professor Emeritus at Missouri University of Science and Technology, where he had served as chair of the History and Political Science Department for 17 years. He has won more than 20 teaching awards, including the University of Missouri's President's Award for Outstanding Teaching. He thinks he's retired, but he's turned into the busiest man on campus. In addition, he is the author of 10 books, including Bright Lights City, Las Vegas and Popular Culture, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, The Gangster, The Flamingo, The Making of Modern Las Vegas, Becoming America's Playground, Las Vegas in the 1950s, and of course, the one closest to our heart, Forged in Gold, Missouri S&T's First 150 Years. And tonight, Larry is going to be talking about women at the university in the very early years. Larry?
Thank you. One of the neat things about doing the history of Las Vegas while I was also doing the history of this campus was I encountered one of our very first students, Gustavus Duncan, who was a mining engineer, ended up in Southern Nevada. So there were newspaper stories about Gustavus Duncan in the Las Vegas papers. And I went, I know this guy, I know who this person is. First of all, thanks to Katie and Debbie for arranging all of this, that wonderful display from the Smithsonian with the posters at the other end of this building and all the wonderful things in the display case has been terrific. One of the things that anybody who agrees to be the last speaker in the series has to be aware of is that if the first three are really good, you can't turn out well because everyone's gone, I've seen the three really good ones. Now that this last one is going to be unacceptable. When I was researching the history of the campus, I went through so much material on people who were not considered welcome at the university. African-American students, female students, international students, the LGBTQ community. I had so much material, I thought there needs to be a whole chapter on those folks who had great difficulty being accepted on the campus. So this was a natural topic for me to work with. And this first slide, I'm not trying to be ironic with this first slide. The quote is from the very first yearbook, the Rolamo 1907. The doors have always been open to women at the Missouri School of Mines. And then underneath it, the title of my talk is The Challenge for Women at MSM. So I hope to get this contradiction straightened out. What I'd like to talk about first is where in the world do you get really good source material for this topic? And besides the primary sources, there are some good secondary sources. The first three histories of the campus are immensely helpful. The title on the far left is one done by a professor of engineering drawing in 1941. It's almost 1,000 pages and it's really hefty to pick up. The one on the far right is done by a historian in 1946, newly hired at the Missouri School of Mines, Clarence Roberts, and they wanted the history of the campus to celebrate the 75th anniversary of MSM. And then the one in the middle is the one I consider the gold standard of histories of the campus. It's a wonderful chronological account by Lawrence Christensen and Jack Ridley. And when I was thinking about how to write my book, I thought it would be silly to follow their pattern. So I did a topical history of the campus. A couple of other sources are really good. The very best article that helped me with this particular talk was done by Lawrence Christensen. His was a study of women at the School of Mines in the late 19th century. And then Sherry Monken, research librarian at S&T, has a wonderful exhibit online, which is kind of an overview from the earliest years to the late 20th century. Then this thing, there is some source material in this book, Forged in Gold. So that's where I drew most of my material for this talk. I think the way to introduce the talk about what it was like to be a female student at the Missouri School of Mines, 1871 to 1930, is talk about the fifth student. Eva Hurdler graduated high school in St. Louis, became a stenographer, a secretary for several years, then decided she wanted to go to college. She got admitted to Washington University, and her course of study was chemical engineering. And she was doing really well in her classes, but in her second year, she discovered the faculty at Washington University had no interest in granting a degree in chemical engineering to any woman. So she transferred to the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy, I guess on the assumption that the faculty at the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy would be more receptive to her hopes of becoming a mining engineer. So let's follow her just a bit. I want to talk about relationships that she had with male students and the faculty, and then something she called an undercurrent of opposition. When she arrived in Rolla, train depot, walked up 8th Street to Pine Street and headed towards the campus, she recollected in later years, as she approached this building, Norwood Hall from the south, and this is the perspective that she would have seen it a little bit further over here. She said when she looked up, all the windows were filled with male faces. All these students wanted to know, what does the co-ed look like? I used the correct word, the co-ed. She will be the only student at the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy from her years 1909 to 1911. Well, her relationship with her fellow students was actually quite good. She tried to fit in as best she could. She quickly learned that almost everybody smoked cigarettes. So she got used to carrying around Bull Durham tobacco and cigarette paper. So when some student would come up to bum her for a cigarette, she would go, okay. She became a treasurer of the senior class. She joined some extracurricular organizations, and going back to Norwood Hall, right here, she was the first female student knighted for St. Pat's. So she really did become part of the student body. She recollected her professors as being very supportive. In fact, she called them collectively her guardian angels. They wanted her to be successful. But that was deceptive. They wanted her to make good grades. They wanted her to graduate. But when you look at the faculty minutes, which are in the archives, and you get to the meeting where the faculty is deciding who will get what degree, there's just a list of names. And when you get to Hurdler's name, they have to decide whether it's going to be a degree in mining engineering or science. And with no explanation, they decided it would be science. She had completed all the degree requirements for mining engineering. In fact, here's the entry in the Rollamo, the yearbook. Her fellow students thought she was going to get a degree in mining engineering. Little Eva, according to the St. Louis papers, is the only female mining engineer in the world. So her buddies thought she would get a degree in mining engineering, but it did not happen. It did not happen because of what she called an undercurrent of opposition. And what she meant by that, we're not clear until 1972, because the campus invites her back in 72 so we could award her the correct degree. It's only 61 years late, but we do give her the correct degree. And she said at the time, she had a clear understanding that even though the faculty often were her guardian angels, they didn't mean that they wanted her to get a degree in engineering. She said it was just too difficult for them. They didn't want a woman to break through to that profession. Now, this fellow is instructive. He is the director of the campus from 1897 to 1907, just before Eva Endurance Hurdler arrives. He is clearly the most consequential leader in the history of the institution. He took a really mediocre school in 1897 into a first-rate mining school in 1907. And when he made his last report to the executive committee of the board of curators, this is in his last report, he's so proud. There are no young women in the school, which elevates the Missouri School of Mines to the status of a true technical institution. We got rid of the females. Now we can become a true mining school. Now the question then becomes, is this unique to the Missouri School of Mines, or is this something that's broadly shared across the country? And what I quickly discovered was whether you're talking about the Missouri School of Mines or the South Dakota School of Mines or the Colorado School of Mines or Purdue or Rensselaer or pick one, there's this widespread perception among professors, whether they're in mining or engineering, that women simply cannot do higher mathematics, physical science, let alone the curriculum in mining, metallurgy, and engineering. That's one of the arguments why women should not get a degree in engineering or mining. The other reason is it's just hard work. You're going to get dirty. It's, as they would have said, it's rough and tumble, and it's not suitable for a woman. And one of the books I drew upon is a terrific book about engineering schools all across the country. It's by an Iowa State historian named Amy Bix. Girls Coming to Tech, a history of American engineering education for women. I was so taken by this book that when I finished this portion of the chapter, I contacted her and asked her if she would read it and critique it for me, because she's kind of the leading light on this topic. And I held my breath till I got her response. But fortunately, she liked what I put together. Look at her observation. Throughout the 19th and most of the 20th century, American observers treated the professional study of technology as men's territory. Women who pursued engineering were either oddities or outcasts. It's peculiar for a woman to want to study physical sciences or engineering or mining. So let's get back to the women at MSM. There were none in 1907, but between these 2 years, there were many women studying at the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy. There's the proof. There's a photo of them. Several women. Do you remember the year that this is, Debbie? I couldn't find a year on this one.
The year is listed in the silver.
Okay.
Dress.
For the dress and the hairstyle? Okay. So if you were female and you came to the Missouri School of Mines, you didn't come to the institution to study metallurgy, mining engineering, or civil engineering. Those were the 3 big degrees offered at the Missouri School of Mines. You probably enrolled in what was called the preparatory program. 1875, other than metropolitan St. Louis and metropolitan Kansas City, there weren't many high schools in the state of Missouri. So the state legislature permitted colleges and universities, including that university in Columbia, they could offer a preparatory program, which in essence is offering what you would take in your junior and senior year in high school now. Primarily is to give you a fundamental strength in mathematics. Or you could simply enroll at the Missouri School of Mines and take whatever courses you want. You were a special student. You weren't working towards a degree. You weren't working towards a certificate. You just wanted to take some courses. Typically, the women who fit in these 2 categories ended up being bookkeepers or teachers of elementary school students or secondary school students. Now, the treatment of these students that intrigue me, there might be 25% of the student body is female. Can they interact with the males? The quick answer is no. Well, they do, but they're not supposed to. The women are segregated from the men. In fact, there was a newspaper article in this era that said the ladies use one staircase and the men use another staircase. And what they meant by that, this is the main academic building on campus. And you can see this is the east end of the Rolla building, and this is where the staircase is. And at the other end of the building, there's another staircase. I don't know whether the women went at the east staircase or the west staircase, but that's how they're supposed to enter the building. And you know how humans are. If there's a rule, you're going to violate the rule, right? And the faculty did punish women differently than men. That is, more often and more severely. If you committed any indiscretion in this era, you didn't go before a dean of students. You went before the entire faculty. There was a faculty meeting usually about every 2 weeks. In the busy part of the year, maybe every week. So if you were accused of doing something, you had to appear before the whole faculty, and you were given a chance to defend yourself, but most people couldn't do that successfully. Just a couple of examples. In 1880, the faculty punished 8 students at a meeting. 5 were female, and their indiscretion was negligence of studies. They have been found to not be studying hard enough, which means they were somewhere talking, right? And they had to sign a pledge. We will devote ourselves more diligently to our studies. Then I found another instance in 1892 where they punished 2 female students who violated the regulations requiring young ladies to be either in recitation or in the library. You can't be sitting outside on the steps, chatting with somebody or wandering around the campus. You had to be in either recitation or in the library. Now let's look at some students after Eva Endurance Hurdler. By 1922, we were up to 9 students, and two of them were pursuing a degree in engineering, one in civil, and one in chemical, and Jenny Lennox is the first female student at the Missouri School of Mines to earn a degree in engineering. It's chemical engineering. But the people writing the script for the yearbook were all men. Look at how they characterized her at the end. And by golly, Jenny's a regular fellow. She may be a woman, but she's a regular fellow. But the attitudes generally don't change about women in the study of technology. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch sent a reporter to Rolla in 1926, and this reporter interviewed students, and he interviewed faculty, and he interviewed administrators, and he came up with a very solid conclusion. He said, a large number of the boys who come to the School of Mines are strongly opposed to attending a coeducational school. Strongly opposed. And then he quotes them. Their preconceived idea of an engineer is rather hard, not inclined towards pink tea affairs. So you see that the dismissive attitude that was there earlier is still there in 1926. In fact, the most famous and the best loved professor at the time was a mathematician named George Dean. And he was interviewed for this article, and he said, you know, it's really hard for the guys. If they're studying calculus, if there's a female there and the guys can see her ankle, they're going to be distracted by that. They won't be focused upon their study of calculus. Now, this is a fellow, even though the students loved him, if you came to class unprepared and you were sent to the board to work out some problems and you couldn't do it, there would be a string of damns and goshes. And if he was close enough to the erasers, he'd pick up an eraser and throw it at you. And he said women are not up to that kind of treatment. Well, let's get at one of those charges about women. Could they do higher mathematics? Could they do the physical science? Could they do the curriculum in engineering? Well, I tried to find the registrar's report for every year. And bless Debbie in the archives, almost every year I could find that. Without exception, whether it's 1935 or 1968 or 2013, every year that there is a difference shown in male GPA and female, the females are always stronger. Always, without exception. So that one argument that women are not up to the task intellectually of being an engineer simply is wrong. But the numbers grow so slowly. By 1964, we have over 4,000 students on campus, and there are 57 females. 57 females out of 4,000. I interviewed a student who graduated in 1960, African-American woman named Leila Thompson Flagg, and she said there would be weeks where she would go to class and walk across campus and never see another female student or never see another African-American student. So you can imagine how alone she felt from 1956 to 1960. And then I wanted just to toss in, to get back to this generalization that I made, well, about the registrar's findings. There was a student named Jean Lloyd, 1941, first female to earn a degree in electrical engineering. And when she was a freshman, she was second in the freshman class in GPA. Then a couple of decades later, a young woman named Barbara Lay was named the outstanding freshman because she had the highest GPA of all the freshmen. So the evidence is overwhelming that clearly women can do the work. Now I want to put this into a national perspective. Luckily for me, this wonderful person did a dissertation on women in engineering, and she looked at the period late 19th century through the mid 20th century, and she found that the first institution to give a degree in engineering to a woman was Iowa State University, 1892. Then she looked at the subsequent 60 years at all the institutions that awarded degrees in either mining or engineering, and look at the grand total. It's only 1,255 in 60 years. And then she ranked them in institutions that gave the most engineering degrees to women, and Purdue led by a considerable margin, 104. Missouri School of Mines was tied for 25th with 15, and they were far, far ahead of most other institutions. So this is a national phenomenon. It's not unique to the Missouri School of Mines. Then I come back to those dismissive articles. Remember the one in 1926? I killed it. Oh, there it is. Reading the Missouri Miner is always instructive because virtually all the writers are males. And in 38, I find this article that talked about the feminine menace on campus. The slowly growing number of female students is causing a problem because the rustle of skirts can be heard in every classroom, and the feminine aroma of perfume is all over the campus. This feminine menace. Well, that's tongue in cheek to be sure, but it's again that dismissive tone about females being on campus. There were a few female faculty members of 1871 to 1930. And I've really focused on Florence Whiting, who got her education at the Missouri School of Mines and taught for 5 years at MSM. And she got fired by the executive committee of the Board of Curators. And here is their rationale. So let's follow this. Florence Whiting is inefficient, especially in elocution and German, too inefficient to teach these subjects. Miss Whiting had refused to resign as requested, so ExCom, that's the executive committee, now passes a resolution removing her. It is charged that she is, quote, peevish and fussy before the students and has become obnoxious to them so as to hinder their progress. Can you imagine any executive committee characterizing a male faculty member as peevish and fussy? I can't. So here again is this dismissive quality when it comes to even female faculty members. So she's fired. She goes on to get a job at another college. And her replacement was another female faculty member, Virginia Conklin, who was on the faculty for 1 year. You may, if you heard the first talk, you heard about Ida Bingston, this extraordinary scientist that campus just got lucky to attract her in 1924, PhD in microbiology, had a wonderful laboratory in the basement of Parker Hall, and she taught occasionally. So we had her teaching for 7 years, but the longest serving faculty member in the early years was Nadine Cease. She had 2 degrees from the Missouri School of Mines and taught in English for 16 years. So how does this change? How do you make Missouri School of Mines, University of Missouri-Rolla, Missouri S&T a more welcoming place for females? Well, I would argue you have to have a support network. You have to have a place to go where you can find other females, where you can commiserate and maybe get some mentoring help. And the first organization that I could find was one called the Rolla-Mo Coeds, which had regular meetings, and they evolved into a sorority the following year. And that's it for 21 years until 1960. And the female students established this chapter of the Society of Women Engineers. If my memory's any good, I believe by the mid-60s, they had the largest chapter in the country. So there weren't that many students here, but I guess all of them joined the Society of Women Engineers. Then you see some more organizations. 1975 is a crucial year. 75, the campus leadership decides one effective way to attract more women is to give them scholarships. And fundraising goes on. We go to corporate America and say we need to have a more diverse campus so that you can have more women that you can recruit for your companies. And it works. And the student enrollment among females really takes off after 1975. And then you see some more organizations that emerge. So that sense of belonging to a network is an important factor. Then there needs to be some housing specifically for women. So they don't have to look for boarding at some house in the neighborhood. And between 62 and 72, I found 4 different places for female students. There was a house on State Street, not far from campus. And then the campus bought an apartment building and converted that to quarters for women. Then Thomas Jefferson Hall, if you're not familiar with the campus, is over that way. It was a private residence hall for quite some time. The campus bought it in the mid-70s. And then finally McInerney Hall. And then there is a quick development of national sororities. By 1981, there are 4 national sororities on campus. So the network of support, housing for women, and ultimately there had to be more female faculty. There just had to be more female faculty so that female students, when they walked into a classroom, didn't always see a guy that looked like me. They need to see a face that looks like them. At least one out of the 6 they have for the semester, or the 10 or 11 they have during an academic year. There was a big push to hire female faculty in the early 60s, and we were up to 7. 1 mathematician, 1 in engineering, and 5 in the Department of English. The growth is slow. As late as 1997, there are only 24 tenure track faculty on the campus. And they tend to be in departments all by themselves. They have trouble getting on research teams because they are the only female. And there's some other difficulties for tenure track females being in a department where they're the only one. They get appointed to a lot of committees to do service work. Or if the campus wants to show it's really inclusive, or if we have a search committee, well, there needs to be a female on it. So let's have this female who's also on 7 other committees be on this search committee. So it's a struggle for these folks. But, and I got this insight from a recently retired faculty member, a truly talented person named Paula Lutz. Professor Lutz was in the biological sciences department, an award-winning teacher, award-winning researcher. She became the chair of the department. She became an associate dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. She became the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. She left and became dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Montana State University. Then she left there and became the dean of Arts and Sciences at the University of Wyoming. When I interviewed her, I said, what was it like? She was one of these early tenure track hires before 1997. And she said that she got lucky because she was in a department where the male faculty members were very welcoming to her, very supportive of her efforts. She said she quickly noticed something. There were almost no female faculty in engineering departments. So quite often she'd have a knock at the door and there'd be a junior in electrical engineering who was a female who just wanted some mentoring from a female faculty member. So she became kind of the informal mentor for so many young women in engineering departments. But that had to be there. And I don't know how many female faculty members we have now, but it was slow growth from 1965 to 1997. But ultimately, what you need to see is women in leadership roles. Not just increasing number of female students, not just an increasing number of female faculty members, but are there any females who can influence policy, who become true leaders of the campus? And that's the last 3 decades. In the last 3 decades, we have an increasing number of women who are appointed as department chairs, and they serve as associate deans, deans, vice provosts, vice chancellors, and then 2012. What is striking about 2012 is that I was on the search committee that led to the hiring of Cheryl Schrader. And when President Tim Wolf had made his decision, he told us all we couldn't say a word, period. We couldn't tell our spouses who the next chancellor was going to be. But there was a big announcement that in the Havener Center, President Wolf was going to introduce the new chancellor for Missouri S&T. So everyone was excited and everyone was seated and the room was packed. And then two people walk in from the back of the room. People kind of turn around, they see a man and a woman. They go, oh, he's the new chancellor. And they just stand there, and President Wolf pulled it off beautifully. He began reading the qualifications of the new chancellor. And he started dropping in a pronoun, she. And there are these gasps in the room, like, it's not the guy. The new chancellor is the woman. And when he announced that the new chancellor for Missouri S&T was going to be Cheryl Schrader from Boise State University, there was extraordinary applause from both men and women, because this was a genuine breakthrough. The breaking of the ultimate glass ceiling for the Missouri University of Science and Technology was the hiring of its first female chancellor. Well, this isn't to say that everything is wonderful in 2021 for female students or female faculty members. The very last class I taught before I officially retired in May, I had 20 students, one female. My last class, I had 19 male students and one female. And I remember that first evening, it was a night class, and the first evening, I'm calling the roll, and this young woman is starting to look around the room. Am I the only female student? Because she had transferred from the University of Missouri in Columbia. So she was used to being in classrooms where 55, 60% of the students are going to be female. So once I finished calling the roll and I started chatting with the students, and she said, I'm it. I'm the only female student. She said, this is unreal. Now, if you want to see her, go to the homepage of the S&T site. There's a story about a father and daughter going to school here at S&T. She's the student I had. And just as it has always been, guess who was the strongest student in the class? She was. The male students were good, but she was an extraordinary student. So looking at the period 1871 to 1930, you see these extraordinary barriers to women, and you can see how long it has taken to break down those barriers. And even though so many of them have been broken down, we still face a campus where 3/4 of the students are male, and the overwhelming majority of the faculty are male, and most of the people in leadership positions are male. So there's still a lot to do. So if we could bring back Eva Endurance Hurdler, she would say, well, you're making some progress, but you guys have got a long way to go. So with that, let me close and answer some questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
So when Hurdler graduated with a degree in science, what did she do?
She has an extraordinary career going from one thing after. I mean, she does mining engineering, but she also gets a degree in, help me out here, Debbie, psychology, and she becomes a teacher. She tries some innovative teaching techniques. She does work all across the United States. There's a lot of press coverage of her for her many endeavors, and it really was an expectation that the campus would have to bring her back at some point and rectify what they had done in 1911 to her. And she was graceful in coming back, although in an interview she did say, I was going to break through a profession that men did not want women to be in, but she had a notable career. Her career could have been better had she gotten a degree in mining engineering, because remember that wonderful entry by the students who published the Rolamo when she graduated. I found a number of articles that reflected this. I just did a search in newspapers.com, and it's all over the national press that in Rolla, Missouri, they are going to give a degree to a woman in mining engineering. That didn't happen. But she had a really good career. And there's some really good examples of that back in the display case.
And it's interesting too that in the description of her, it says that she expects to operate a gold mine. She operated a lead mine.
Yeah,
So she
Yeah.
did get to be a miner.
yeah, she was a miner indeed. Yeah, Roger.
So I'm curious, and you may not have the information. What about other places other than the United States, in Northern Europe or in Europe in general? Was the experience of women at this period any different there than it would have been here?
I do not know, but my guess is it wouldn't have been different at all,
Yeah.
because there's so much interplay between the engineers in the United States and those in other nations. And the Missouri School of Mines will hire faculty members from European universities. This fellow, George Ladd, he got his degree in geology at Harvard, but he did postdoctoral work at the University of Munich. So I'd have to check, but I don't think you'd see much difference.
And that would actually also be the reason why they would want somebody who instructs in German, right? Because so many of the students who graduate with bachelor's degrees here, as at the time period in the late 19th century, would actually go on for PhDs in German universities.
If they were interested in a PhD, correct. But most of the students here didn't graduate. They found lucrative jobs in mining after a couple, 3 years. And those who did graduate often ended up in Central and South America in the mining industry there. So many of our international students come from Peru and Mexico because these alumni of this institution are down there, and these students will say, I really want to be a miner, and they would quickly recommend Missouri School of Mines because we don't have any recruitment staff to go out and find these students. And people like George Ladd are boasting in his annual reports that we have X number of international students, and he says it's because of the reputation of the school, and the people spreading the reputation of the school are the alumni going to those institutions. But you are right, if you're going to get a PhD in the 19th century, you better plan on going to Germany in most cases. Yeah.
So you mentioned Purdue, they were so much further ahead, but that's Indiana, that's.
Yeah. West Lafayette, Indiana. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that apartments, why do you think that they were so much more progressive in their ideas that women and people and the rest of the world?
You know, when I began researching our campus's history, I read several histories of engineering schools, and I can't put a finger on why Purdue is so far ahead in so many areas, but they have been consistently, if not the most progressive engineering school in the country, one of. They have a high percentage of women in their student body. One of our former chancellors, Martin Jiske, who was here 5 years, 86 to 91, I think. He went on to become president at Iowa State University, ended his career at Purdue University. And when I interviewed him for the book, he talked about the commitment of their board of governors and the leadership team that he joined to be much more inclusive than what he experienced at Iowa State or at UMR. Long tradition at Purdue.
Could it be because they were part of more of the industrial belt country?
I think it has to do with the kind of leaders that they attracted. Jiske was very good here. Martin Jiske, in his 5 years, was excellent at trying to diversify the faculty. He would go to each faculty, each department, and say, if you can find a really talented female faculty member, we'll hire her. If you can find a really talented African-American faculty member, I'll hire them. Because he really did want a more inclusive faculty. He believed that the way you get a more inclusive student body is to have inclusive faculty. Yes.
And this is a little bit off of the topic, but you mentioned early on, you said that there's a long history here. You said it's another presentation about how the university struggled to like embrace diversity in all its forms.
Yeah.
I wondered about this in the work as the university is that far in terms of embracing?
We struggle.
disabilities?
We struggle. It's only been in the last decade or so that we've been really serious about it. And now a student who has any kind of disability can report that to the student affairs office, and that office will write a memo to faculty members saying this student needs help in these areas. That's relatively new. Thank goodness we do it now. And I always told the students first day of class, if you bring me that letter, I'll make whatever accommodations that we need to make for you. But 20 years ago, we weren't doing that. The bigger challenge for the campus was in accepting African-American students, but that was nationwide. The two fellows who broke the segregation barrier at the Missouri School of Mines did that in 1950. So we had no African-American students until the institution was 79 years old. But that also would be true of the University of Missouri and Columbia. Both institutions desegregated in the same year, 1950. And the same would be true of the LGBTQ community, who were largely absent on purpose. They did not want to out themselves. And when I first started finding evidence of a growing community, it was really the early 1990s. And you see it in the Missouri Miner. There are pro and negative articles, pro and negative editorials, and a lot of scathing letters that were written to the Miner, and lots of terrible phone calls to the Miner editorial staff. And finally, in 93, there's a letter to the editor signed by 19 faculty members that this has to stop, that this institution should be a tolerant institution. And I've told many people, I didn't put myself in the book. Yeah, I didn't want to be narcissistic and give myself a place in the book. But when the marketing and communications folks found that letter to the editor and put it in, I was flipping through it one day and I looked at the people who signed it, and I signed it. So I'm actually in the book, but I forgot that I'd signed that letter. But we had, and again, this is not a unique campus. It's been a struggle for most campuses across the country. In that year that we welcomed the first two African-American students, it was in a lawsuit that applied only to the University of Missouri, Columbia, and the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy. I stumbled across a collection of letters exchanged among the presidents of the 5 teachers' colleges in Missouri: Northeast Missouri State, Northwest Missouri State, Central Missouri State, Southeast Missouri State, and Southwest Missouri State. The archivist, your counterpart at Missouri State University, helped me. And when those presidents saw that judgment in the Cole County Court, their question was, what are we going to do? What are you going to do in Kirksville or in Maryville if a Negro student applies to your institution? So they fretted about it and wrote letters back and forth. And finally, they went to their legal counsel and said, they've assured us that this decision only applies to the Missouri School of Mines and to the University of Missouri. So the test case was an African-American student who graduated. She was salutatorian at her high school in Springfield, Missouri, and applied to Missouri State in library science. She said, Lincoln University, which is where all African-American students were supposed to go, doesn't offer the courses I need. So in this exchange of letters among these 5 college presidents, the president of Southwest Missouri State College sends the letter and says, here's what she has asked for. We took it to our legal counsel, and I wrote to the president of Lincoln University, said, well, we're just starting to offer library science courses. So the president of Southwest Missouri State writes to her and says, you can get this at Lincoln. We're not admitting you to Southwest Missouri State. So again, the Missouri School of Mines is not unique in that regard.
Cheryl Traeger, what was her, where did she go to school and what were her grades?
She would proudly tell you she got her PhD at Notre Dame University. She was a Notre Dame PhD in electrical engineering. She became an associate dean, I believe that's right, at a university in Texas. Then she became dean of engineering at Boise State in Idaho. She was there as dean for 5 or 6 years, and then became a vice president for economic development at Boise State. Very, very strong candidate for chancellor. What search committees do is that they identify 4 or 5 really strong candidates, and give all the information to the president of the university. It's solely the decision of the president of the university. We can't even rank. You can't send in saying, this is our number one, number two, and number three. They don't want them ranked. That give us your best 4 or 5 and I'll make the decision. But the committee believed she was the best choice. So we were happy when he told us that was his choice. 5 years. And that's become increasingly about the average 5 to 6 years for a chancellor to be at any one institution that they go on to others. The longest serving leader of this campus was Curtis Laws Wilson, for whom we named this building. He served 22 years as dean at the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy, by far the longest tenure. Charles Fulton, 17 years, that sound right, Debbie? Yeah, but 4, 5, 6 years is usually the maximum. Of course,
few that were less than a year.
that's right. Of the 26 leaders of the campus, we had one fellow who served 4 months, Durwood Copeland, late 1940, early 1950, right?
Right around then.
Yeah. Durward Copeland, and the reason he left,
Well, I didn't really need, he stayed here.
well, the reason he stepped down, in 1915, this school was not growing very much because we offered degrees in mining, metallurgy, civil engineering. It was going to be just a mining school. And if you're just a mining school, you're never going to get big numbers. So the campus wanted to offer chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, and electrical engineering. The president of the university said no. The board of curators said no. So a local state senator introduced it into the Senate. It passed that this school could offer it. It passed the House. It went on to the governor. He signed it, and the board of curators said, we don't care. The Missouri School of Mines cannot offer chemical, electrical, mechanical engineering. So it took a lawsuit to the state Supreme Court to order the University of Missouri president and the board of curators to allow this institution to offer those degrees. So the campus gets to grow, and we add ceramic engineering in 1926. Gosh, these are good questions. They need a question to stump me. You always want to say, hear the speaker say, I have no idea.
Try with this one. So,
Okay.
This is from Maggie. What formal mentoring programs are in place at S&T now to support work with women students, faculty, and staff?
Oh, there's a whole array of support networks now. There is, for example, a FemFac listserv, right? Professor DeWitt, how many are on that list? Would you roughly say? Is it all the female faculty who are on that list?
Not all of them, but pretty much all of them.
Yeah, yeah.
stuff like
Well,
that.
talk about what that group does.
Oh, I've never participated. Okay, I'm the bad one.
So, but there are gatherings, there are meetings that they have, and Chancellor Jack Carney, who was here 2006 to 12, did appoint a committee to try and increase inclusion, and that's been a committee that has been helpful. And there are a number of student organizations for female students. That didn't exist 25 years ago. It is something that's really happened in the last generation. So it's not just the single faculty member like Paula Lutz who's trying to help all the female students. Yeah.
I had another one. So that very first quote you used from the 1907 Rollo.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, where was that found in the yearbook? Was it associated with a certain group or just kind of out there on the page?
I don't recollect, but when you have a yearbook, and your yearbooks are wonderful because there's so much narrative in it. Each class will write the history of the class, for example. And they always are trumpeting all the good things that are happening on campus. And I don't know where on the page this was located, whether it was part of a long story or whether it was just a headline, but it just struck me that in 1907, they had this sentence that the doors have always been open. And it's the same year where the director of the campus says, thank God we finally have no more female students. We are now a true mining school.
So do you think that was whoever wrote this in the Rollo, a direct kind of conversation back to what
No,
Lad had said,
No.
or no?
no, I don't think so. Though he got along well with the students. Ladd is a fellow who really had to deal with what he thought was the most significant problem with students. There are so many taverns close to campus. I mean, all you gotta do is walk off the campus to the south. If you get to 8th Street, from Pine to the train depot, some years there were 7 to 8 taverns in just that 2 block. And, you know, in 7 or 8 minutes, you're there. And over again, there are students being brought before the faculty committee to be punished. Some of them are kicked out. Some have to sign pledges they'll never drink again. So Ladd is worried about that part of the student body, not attracting female students. And what he does, he thinks the solution is, he hears a guy's going to open a new pool hall close to the campus, and he promises there won't be any pool in the pool hall. And that word gets out to the Ladd administration. They're